All right. You may be good. I am really.
Can anyone pick out what song this is?
I think this one's broken here.
I should know this.
We sing the song every week, 48 minutes after sundown on Saturday. Well, you don't have to have headphones, right? We'll be all right. It's just...
That ain't gonna work.
Welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. We have an interesting one today, which is we have three people in the studio who were part of a larger group who have come back from Spain. They were on a mission. It was an interesting mission that brings a sad part of history to the present day with a little hope. We have Rabbi Michael Farman, Scott Sussman, and Jim Graham of Temple Emmanuel. They're back from Valencia, Spain, where they made a delivery and came back with some stories to tell. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for coming in. So anyone figure out what the song was?
I should have.
I'll give you a hint. The band is the Afro-Semitic Experience. Every other track is either a Jewish liturgical song done in jazz or a gospel song.
And of course, I know the music. I've been here before. I've been here before.
Anyway, it's Eliyahu Hanavi.
Okay. It's Eliyahu Hanavi.
And you are a musician. Rabbi Farman is. Anyway, so you went to Spain. You were delivering a Torah scroll to a new congregation in Valencia, Spain. How did it come about that you went on this mission, and why?
A number of years ago, a Holocaust memorial scroll that was in our congregation since 1967. It was retired in 2007, and it was living in this beautiful display cabinet when I arrived at Temple Emmanuel in 2009. And a number of years ago, we had a scribe inspect all of our Torah scrolls and took a look at the Holocaust memorial scroll as well. And I said, such a beautiful scroll, such a shame we can't restore it. And he said, oh, yes, we can. It will require a lot of resources, but it's possible technically. And so we raised funds, and we restored the Torah scroll, brought it back into our ark, and once again, every bar bat mitzvah at our congregation reads from this historic Torah scroll. From
just
the
so
time
listeners know, Torah scroll is on parchment. You unwind it with these wooden holders. They're the first 5 books of Moses in the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of Moses, and that's it's a holy document, so it needs to be perfect.
Correct.
It needs to have all the letters filled in. It can't have smudges.
Correct.
So you can't have the rips. So every once in a while, you get a scribe, you get some kind of expert in to make sure it can be kosher again.
Thank you.
That's what you guys did.
Very good description. And so we did restore it. We put it back in the ark, which actually meant that we now had one extra. We only have a space in our ark for 3 Torah scrolls, and we had an extra Torah scroll, which in addition actually required a little restoration as well. And at the time, the pandemic hit, and we said, we'll get back to this. And that extra Torah scroll was sitting in my office.
And one reason, right, a lot of congregations have these old scrolls that came from Europe after the Holocaust. And tell me if you feel differently. I always had the sense that it's this feeling that we weren't eliminated in the Holocaust, that there's something about our holiest item, our book, that we use to keep ritual and keep the faith alive in our values and our traditions. Restoring that had this symbolic value of continuing to thrive and survive.
It's a very powerful story. Memorial Scrolls Trust is an organization in London that in the early 60s received over 1,500 Torah scrolls that were rescued from Bohemia and Moravia.
But that's the old story. So now we went in reverse. You had this scroll sitting here. It came from Europe.
And it's been fixed, and it is back in our ark. But in the process, another Torah scroll, which actually most likely was written about 100 years ago in southern Poland, and we began digging a few years ago, trying to figure out the provenance of it, and it was actually in the possession of another local community in Derby, And when in 1979 it came to us
Because they closed their congregation.
Because they closed their congregation, merged with someone else, and that's actually a pretty typical story of how Torah scrolls often travel. If the community did make it in one place, but there is a new one somewhere else, someone knows someone, and they say, you know, as the community is winding down, or perhaps a couple of communities merged, and they have an extra scroll. Is there a Jewish community that could use one? And that is a typical story. And so we said, one of these days, someone will need a Torah scroll, maybe someone out there in the world, and we will have one, and maybe then we will find the funds to restore it. A number of months ago, I saw a post from a colleague, Rabbi Alona Lisitsa is a professor at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and she serves a number of these small nascent congregations all over Iberian Peninsula. She speaks Spanish, she's speaking some Portuguese as well now. And Alona is an old friend, and I saw a post from her saying, you know, this congregation I've been supporting for the last couple of years, a new congregation in Valencia, Spain, has been growing and is ready to, they would like to have a Torah scroll of their own so that they can come and celebrate festivals and Shabbat mornings, as well as coming together on a Friday night. Is there anyone out there who might have a Torah scroll? And, you know, it's one of those moments where I know the colleague, I know the story, I know I don't have to figure out all of the rest of the details because there's someone that I have a relationship with who already knows the story. So I immediately sent her a message and I said, funny you should say that. I may have a Torah scroll for you. And it was one of the quickest decisions of the Temple Manual Board. Once they heard the story, they said, we would absolutely support this. We would love to donate this Torah to a new congregation. And the rest is history. So
and there's a new congregation, and then there's a new congregation. At our shul, we knew there was a new congregation in Riverdale. They needed a Torah scroll. We had extra. This is very different. Riverdale, they've always been Jews practicing Judaism. Right. Valencia, Spain's a different story. Maybe Jim or Scott, you might tell us why it was important to your congregation to quickly say yes to send a European revised scroll to Valencia, Spain.
Well, I had this thought recently, but it was sort of percolating down. As you know, our synagogue is in its 7th decade. Okay, so it's coming on 70 years. Paul, I suspect you're familiar with the parable of the carob tree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, and it goes something like this. When fellow's planting, an older guy is planting a tree, a carob tree. Carob trees take a long time to mature. He's asked, why you putting this tree in here? You're never going to see it. He says, well, someone put one in here for me 70 years ago or whatever. I got to look at the next generation. So in one sense, I mean, what we were doing is we were the beneficiary of Torah. As a small congregation, there wasn't one. We acquired them. They were, gifted or sent. And this is an opportunity to give back. And particularly in a place like Spain, where, obviously the Jews had been expelled. It had a long history of, there was an expulsion. It also had a long history of forced conversions, but people sort of secretly practicing, and out of the limelight or out of view. So in particular, a place like Valencia was, with these, new people creating a new congregation, we were able to give back the gift that.
Well, Spain, they tried to wipe out Judaism in such a. It's not just the Holocaust, right?
No.
So in 1391, in Valencia, there was a massacre of Jews, and then, of course, as you mentioned, in 1492, Jews were expelled. And that for centuries, people secretly would keep rituals alive in their closets or when the shades were drawn. So I guess, and maybe Scott, something about this, like in Valencia now, there finally, centuries later, there appears to be a revival of practicing Judaism in this land where there was such official, centuries-long efforts to wipe it out. Is that accurate? Like, what was going on with this congregation?
Yeah, so it's a great.
If you get close to the mic, like you're almost touching.
Great question. So yes, so approximately 600 years prior, the Torahs had all been expelled from Spain as well, and it was amazing being in Valencia, seeing this congregation that was so dedicated to forming a community. And it was special for us to be able to come there on the 600th anniversary to return this Torah that started in Europe, made its way to the U.S., and now was coming back to Spain. And to be part of that connection was something that was just so deeply meaningful. And
what is the facts on the ground? There are 5 communities that are starting in that community. Like, this is a Reform synagogue, right? It's called Shir Chadash, right? A new song. Right. And they're just growing now, and that's why they need the Torah scroll. And in my understanding, there are also other Jewish congregations getting started there. In
Valencia itself.
Yeah.
Yes, there's this is it looks a little different in Spain, obviously, because of the you can't have 500 years of almost total Jewish absence not have an impact on the way the community develops. Some people that we have met are Valencianos. They grew up there, and so they're part of the community that has been around for a few decades now.
So there's been a Jewish community there.
There's been a Jewish community.
How did it get restarted? When was it deemed safe to come out of the shadows?
I think the 20th century, with all of its upheavals and with all of its destruction in Europe, has also seen certain places where, in Spain and in Portugal for that matter, where there hasn't been Jewish presence for a very, very long time. In the early 20th century, there was some re-emergence of Jewish life. People in Europe looking for a place to be Jewishly safe, and so for the part of the irony is Spain and Portugal for a while became a little safer than some of the other places in Europe for the Jews. Perhaps for a short period of time, but there was an opportunity to reestablish some of those communities as well. And so we met some people, but there was a lot of people in the community also who come from all over Latin America that are now living in Spain. We spoke, it was a truly international sense. There were people from Venezuela and
what is it about
Cuba
Valencia that would draw such a diverse group of people there? You know, Jim, were you there? You met them?
I honestly don't know, but there were people from Argentina, there were people from Brazil, there were people from Cuba. There were people who went from Venezuela to the Canary Islands, and then somehow made their way in another part of Spain to the southern coast, and people from Eastern Europe too. I don't know how that came about, I'm afraid to say.
Right. We're talking to Rabbi Michael Farman and Scott Sussman and Jim Graham of Temple Emmanuel. They came back with a whole delegation from our area to Valencia, Spain. The site 634 years ago of a massacre is part of hundreds of years of expelling and oppressing Jewish people, where Jewish communities are re-emerging, and they brought a Torah scroll, a historic Torah scroll originally from Poland, restored from Temple Emmanuel to this new Reformed Jewish community in Valencia, Shir Hadash, so they could start having a Torah scroll and read from it during religious services there. So you got on a plane. Was it July 9th?
It was July 2nd.
July 2nd.
Was
okay.
2nd, 3rd, something like this. And then,
how many of you went?
Well, we all sort of traveled independently, depending on people's schedule. But then we all assembled in Madrid on a Friday morning, July 4th. It was a very interesting experience. And yeah, we got on the train from Madrid, and we got to Valencia, and it started from there. What we didn't know going into this journey, and certainly into this trip, I certainly, and most people who have ever looked at the Spanish Jewish history know about 1492 and the expulsion. It's such a big event, seminal event in the Jewish history. But I did not know about the specific pogroms in Valencia and the burning of the Torah scrolls that occurred a good 100 years before that. But in Valencia, that is an event that is remembered. And of course, those pogroms happened in the beginning of July. So as we picked a weekend almost at random that all of us could somehow pull it together.
July 9th was when the massacre was.
And we began hearing from Valencia that actually the symbolism of us landing there and bringing the Torah scroll into this community was such a powerful reminder that you can reclaim certain things sometimes 600 years plus after the very painful events. And it doesn't make everything go away, and it doesn't fix everything and anything. And in this story, we all have experienced some interactions with people. There was a little language barrier for some of us, not luckily for Scott, who was able to communicate directly.
You were the translator, Scott? You know Spanish?
I speak some Spanish, yes. So
I think the sum is a very modest.
Can you remember a conversation where something interesting was developing, you needed to translate and maybe succeeded or almost succeeded in communicating an idea back and forth?
yeah, absolutely. So there were discussions just around what it was like to come from Connecticut and bring this Torah scroll. And one of the specific things that caught my interest was talking about the role of women in Judaism. And Temple Emmanuel has had a number of women presidents, and it's really a community that focuses on the humanity, and it's not based upon gender. And one of the people in Valencia was just curious what it was like to have women in this role. And it was eye-opening because while there was so much shared humanity there, this was something that in 2025 caught me off guard.
Because they don't have women leading and things like that, or reading from the Torah? Oh, they do.
They do, but they were curious what it was like to come from a place like the U.S. in 2025, where there's so much going on, and how that compared to their experience in Valencia.
Now, I'm trying to picture it. I'm guessing that you didn't board the train in Madrid with Jim and Scott holding the Torah like you're going around. Like, how did you physically bring it to Valencia?
There's a story.
That's a good story.
Michael, I think, is best suited to explain that.
So we prior to departure, we have the challenge with something. Torah scroll is fairly large.
Some of them are so heavy, like I don't even do the Haggadah anymore.
This is not a light one.
This one was not a light one.
Why did they do that? For magisterialness?
Well, it's easier to read and it's beautiful. Right. So there's it's a heavier Torah scroll. It, unfortunately, also one of the fashions, for some reason, you need to speak to a scribe about this, but in the middle of the 20th century, there was a certain custom of glazing the backs of the Torah scroll with sort of a chalky-like substance. The parchment looks brighter, I guess, but it essentially adds a second layer of the entire length of the Torah scroll, making it that much heavier. And so maybe protects the parchment, maybe just makes it thicker. So this was indeed one of the glazed Torah scrolls. The other thing about it is that the Torah scrolls are pretty fragile. Not so much the parchment itself when it's rolled, but it sits on the Tzei Chaim, on these wooden rollers, and they stick out. They're designed to handle it and lift and carry it around, and most importantly, roll. And it's not designed for taking it into airplanes or trains. Of course, there's plenty of advice that we received from the scribes who said, look, while it's not something any of us want to do, shipping the Torah scroll, if you want the safest way of doing this, you pack it in this double box and you create some kind of a custom-built container that will protect it, and then you ship it with
UPS or FedEx.
Well, the answer is God. Probably right. Or even
I hear those trucks do go over the water.
Well, you check it in right into the luggage, and
it's on luggage.
Well, you can check it into luggage then if you do that with this box. And I understood, this is one of those emotional conversations where I understood that technically that is possible, but I really, really didn't feel comfortable doing that. There was something.
You didn't want to bring it to the airport and have a problem at the last minute.
I didn't want to come to the. I knew I was going to have a problem last minute. That was, I think, shipping it like this would have not been any kind of a problem last minute, other than taking a Torah scroll that we carry around the synagogue when we take it out of the ark, and we hold it tight, we hug it, and we say, to those who grab onto it, and to say, bye-bye, you're going as a suitcase. There was something, I knew that I might be forced to, but I wanted to figure out a way if I can avoid this. And so we talked about it, and I've listened to plenty of stories from friends who had to carry Torah scrolls on board, and friends who travel with musical instruments. And you quickly learn that no matter what you do in advance, including purchasing a separate seat for something like this, you may show up and that seat is not available for you. And you're not an arbiter at the last moment. It's an inanimate object, and so we said, okay, we wrapped it in soft bubble wrap.
The bubble wrap.
You had a bubble wrap.
We bubble wrapped.
Polish Torah scroll.
That's correct.
Okay.
We bubble wrapped the
How
Torah.
many pounds was it?
It's a good question. I didn't weigh it. It was not light. But I also spoke to to Iberia, which was the company we were flying with, and they advised me that as long as the total measurements of the hand luggage is under 158 centimeters, luckily I understand centimeters well enough, that it would be okay. And I measured it, and I think it was coming in at about 155, 156. So I thought, I have an excuse. I asked them to add it to our reservation. They promised they were going to do this. In fact, they did. But, no one can guarantee anything to you. So we grabbed a little bag, one of those roller bags that, that the pop-up tents come in. And it turns out it was a perfect solution. And
so you were the one physically bringing it, Rabbi?
I was the one physically bringing it. And in fact, we had our Jeffrey Levick, who is a documentary maker and a filmmaker, and he's been filming some of this and turning. Hopefully, that we will get to see a documentary at some point about.
So you get to the airport, and what happened? JFK.
We get to JFK. We walk up.
How'd you get to JFK? How'd you get to JFK? Connecticut.
We got a cab, and the three of us got in the car and with the Torah, and we got there, and we walk in. And the first thing that happens is the security person says, "You cannot go through to security. Your bag needs to be checked in. It's too large." And I say, "Oh no, it isn't." And they say, "Yes, it is." And you have to be very calm, and you have to appreciate. Said I spoke to the company, and they said it's okay for us to bring this on board.
Did you have like an email on your phone?
At this point, she's not asking. She says, bring the representative of the company. And I knew that once you start bringing representatives, it's easier. I think in those circumstances, I don't blame anyone. I was prepared for this.
But you come from the Soviet 4 years.
You see.
But
you were probably the right guy.
But the truth is, it's easier for people, I think, in any unusual circumstance to say no. And so she tried to say no and then called the supervisor, and the supervisor tried to say no and then called her supervisor. And I kept explaining very calmly that this is a sacred object in the Torah scroll, and the third supervisor knew what the Torah scroll was.
I noticed like a TSA once, I had my to film it, and they were just like looking at it like it was some kind of evil bomb.
Exactly. So it's you also have to account for that people. It's not that people mean anything wrong, but it's just that they don't know. It's not something every day.
The supervisor said, go ahead.
So eventually the supervisor said, go ahead. And once we made it through security and cleared security, then the next hurdle was, how do we get it onto the plane? I actually, at the last moment...
how are you carrying it?
It was in this little bag, and we carried it. But in the bag, it sort of still looked big enough, or too big maybe. So before boarding the plane, I made a last-minute decision and switch. I actually unzipped the bag and I pulled out this Torah wrapped in bubble wrap.
Could you see through the bubble wrap?
You can see what's in there, and then I walked up. I walked up to the counter, and I said, "I have this thing," and they tried to say, "And what do you think you're going to do with it? There's no space on the plane for something like this." And so I showed them the letter that we were carrying from the community.
A seat reserved?
No, we didn't have the seat reserved.
So you're going to fly all to Spain with this on your lap?
So I showed them the letter explaining what it was. I also opened on my phone, because I didn't realize this, but the community in Valencia was so excited about this that we kept getting... starting the day before, we started getting these articles all in Spanish explaining, and Temple Emmanuel name, my name is all over these articles, and the excitement and talking about the massacre in 1391 and all of this. So I pulled it up. It was a Spanish airline, so I pulled it up on my phone, and I'm showing them the letter, and I'm showing them this, and once I think they understood what we were dealing with, they said, "Hold tight, we're going to figure this out." And in the end, they said, "Sir, please come with us." And they marched me onto the plane and pointed me to an overhead bin above the first class. And I carefully placed it in there and then went all the way back to the back of the plane.
It would not have fit in the coach overhead things. But
right.
Torah got a first class
the,
ride.
the Torah got a first class ride, and so
And on the train, were you able to carry it?
yeah, the train
Yeah.
I bought an extra ticket. Train is easy, trains are easy.
Well, we're talking about a mission to Valencia, from which our three guests were among a large group of people who have returned to our area. Rabbi Michael Farbin, Scott Sussman, Jim Graham of Temple Emmanuel. They went to Valencia, Spain, where 634 years ago there was a massacre of Jews and of Torahs. And that was before the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492. They brought a Torah scroll for a new community that started up there, a Jewish community that's going to use that Torah scroll, originally from Poland, Temple Emmanuel, now back to Spain, so that they can keep religious practice alive in that country. So you get to Valencia. What did you do there? What was the itinerary?
Well, the heat wave that we had in Connecticut was just cresting in Spain, so it was hot. So, like any good person does in Spain, we found a place in the shade. We had some beers and some fish, and we kind of relaxed for a little bit. Once we settled in, we got a chance to meet members of the community, and that's where things really started to feel magical. Obviously, it was a big deal just to get the Torah scroll to Spain. Once we started meeting the congregants, connecting, realizing how much we had in common, that's when the point of the mission really became clear to me.
And what did you feel like in terms of having those points of commonality? What did that make you feel as someone who was bringing this Torah scroll back to Europe in a place where Jewish practice had dissolved and was reviving?
So it really made me feel part of the continuum. So obviously we talk about going from generation to generation, and this was across continents and many generations, and just to feel the emotional connection was something I wasn't necessarily expecting, and really just took me by surprise.
So Jim, now fast forward me, was it Friday night service where it was formally presented?
Yeah,
Sabbath
I
service?
think that's right. It was a Friday night.
So what happened at that service?
Well, understand, as you, Paul, I know, understand that the Torah contains, it's all in Hebrew. It's the same whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Russia. It's the same thing. Okay, so it's this common, universal, sacred object, and that enhances its importance, in my view. And I don't know that we knew what to expect with the people that we were meeting, but there were two things that. First of all, the sense of gratitude that the congregation had was palpable. And then actually, as we got into the service and the Torah was presented, it was very emotional for people. Literally, there were grown men holding this Torah with tears in their eyes. It's hard to not, take an emotional reaction to that in a very, very positive way. And I feel like, my mom used to always tell me, everybody's mom tells me, it's better to give than to receive. But that's, theoretical. This was the actual.
So how many of you were there from Temple Emmanuel?
There was 7 of us.
And was the formal handoff at a Friday night Shabbat service?
The formal handoff was a Friday night service.
So they have a rabbi there?
Well, that's the other, look, there's planning and then there's real life. So the rabbi who supports that community lives in Israel and comes a few times a year for festivals and a few other things. We have arranged and orchestrated all of this carefully so that in the beginning of July, the rabbi would be there with her community that she's supporting and teaching on Zoom and other things, and we will come, bring the Torah, do a little handover, and let them run with it and enjoy it. The tricky part was due to the conflict with Iran and the bombings and the rockets that rained on Israel. All of the flights were canceled for a couple of weeks, and then all the flights were canceled for the foreseeable future. And the rabbi at the last moment her flight was canceled. She couldn't make it into Spain.
But here's this rabbi with a bubble wrap Torah.
So then becomes
Paul,
the question.
Man plans, God laughs.
I was expecting to see an old friend and hand over the Torah and say, "You're it." This is and. So I was asked to help, but I think it was actually a very good learning moment for all of us, because the lay leaders in the community, who usually run their own services, I mean, they do the best they can, And all of them said, "Oh, great, there's another rabbi coming, so he will do this for us." And their rabbi said, "Actually, they're bringing you a Torah. You better show them that you're a real community and that you're doing this on your own." So they led the services on a Friday and on Saturday. I offered and taught a couple of new melodies on a Friday night and got people to sing. But so I had a little bit of an impact.
Which psalm?
Well, I taught them a new melody for L'Chadodi from
which
Ilana
one?
Arian, which is a more modern. It's about 10 years now. And I also taught one of our favorites, Temple Emmanuel from Alan Gudis, V'chol HaChaim Yudu Chesela, at the end of Amidah. And it was just a really powerful singing together, because they told us that they like to sing. Temple Emmanuel likes to sing. So this was a good, impactful way. But then on Saturday morning, they asked my help with running the Torah service. And you can plan for anything. The emotions of it were running very high. It was very powerful. They had one volunteer who read one of the aliyot from the Torah. They asked me to fill in for the other two.
And just so listeners know, it's hard to read from the Torah.
It's not easy
because there's no vowels.
There's
no punctuation.
Right.
And it's all block letter. It's not so. You have to really study each line and remember not only where the vowels are and where the sentences begin and end, but there's also trope. There's also a musical notation that doesn't appear in the scroll.
Because I had to do this sort of at the last moment, the trope I've decided not to try and embarrass myself. Well, I read, and it was a very powerful experience. And so you're asking how the community handled this. For the first aliyah, they asked all of us, our delegation, to come and have an aliyah.
And that means when each part, when they break out on 7 parts of it on Saturday, there's a reading from the Torah. Before each part, somebody gets the honor of saying the prayer, introducing the reading, and that's it.
So our delegation got a chance to do the blessings before and after the aliyah. But for the third aliyah, they called on all the women in their community to come up and have an aliyah. And, it's getting back to what Scott was saying, that was so powerful and so important. And it wasn't a point of an ideological importance where the rabbi showed up and said, "We must do this." You can tell palpably what an impact that was having on all these women in the room who came up for it was such a powerful moment. But then I have to tell you about this embarrassing moment for me. Not embarrassing enough, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be telling this. But we come to the end of the Torah service, and I turn around to the vice president of the congregation, a lovely, lovely man who is very knowledgeable and teaches a lot, and I think is a real staple of the community, Paco. And I say to him, and he's translating for me to the larger congregation. And I said, at Temple Emmanuel, and as in many other places, the minchag, the custom, is that we read the Mishaberach, the prayer for healing, with the Torah scroll out. And we name the names. That's what we do. What is it that you do? I said very, politely incorporating him, and because I don't want, I'm just a visitor. I don't want to mess with whatever I established traditions there. And he looks at me and he says, "We don't know what we do. We've never done this before. We've never had a Torah scroll here." And I froze for about a minute. I just stood there, sort of fighting back the tears. But I know everything about this story, or almost everything. I know what I'm walking into, but you can never prepare for this, because it was so visceral, that moment of saying, here are people who are so excited to hold this Torah scroll, right, on a Friday night. Lindsay, our president, took the scroll from my hands and placed it into the hands of Alex, who is this tall Brazilian man who's the president of the congregation. And this grown-up picks up the Torah, and tears start rolling down from his eyes. As you can imagine, there wasn't a dry eye in the rest of the room.
This was Friday night.
This was Friday night. And so that's when you realize that it's not only is it such an emotional, it's not only an important moment, because it's an important moment, right? The Torah comes, the synagogue gets a new Torah. It's an important moment. But there was so much emotion behind that moment that people have cried when talking to us, despite the language barrier, and we saw. I was mentioning just Jeff continues to work on all the footage that he
there's
took
gonna be
there.
and before we get to the movie, was there any celebratory meal or meals? How did you guys mark this? I mean, basically, how's the food? Yeah.
Yes, there was. Probably after the Friday night service, they had put together a wonderful. Obviously, I think we're all vegan that night.
Wow.
And it was just a wonderful assembly of.
Even the challah was vegan.
Oh, yeah, I think the challah was vegan as well. And it was just wonderful. And it was such a. We all had something to eat. We all were talking with people, and just. I mean, it was so sweet. It really was so sweet because they obviously had put themselves out, to welcome us and to make sure that we were,
and
well fed.
What about broader sense of welcome? Now, you went there a trip at a time when there is so much worldwide concern about what's happening in Gaza, and especially the Reform Movement had a statement coming out the other day about starvation and what's going to be dealt with that. Did you find that same welcome outside the synagogue walls? How were you received in Spain, and did you even hear about this? Did people bring up what's going on?
I think that, look, there's a few things that if you are a community or if you are an individual Jew, in many places, and certainly in Europe, we were walking out from the train station, and our filmmaker had a friend or an acquaintance who was a local producer help him out because with language skills and others, and he met with us at the train station. And I was walking out, and because I was walking out with the Torah, I had my kippah on. Right. I don't walk with the kippah all the time, but in the moment when I'm doing something so obviously Jewish, I felt that I wanted that moment to be to look this way and feel this way. And afterwards, I got a text that it was a forwarded text from our local handler who said, "Please remind everyone that for their safety, they really should not be walking around."
Because I was in Ireland a couple of years ago. It was before October 7th, but I really made a point of wearing my yarmulke everywhere, and I knew there was a lot of anti-Jewish feeling. And it was kind of interesting. When I travel, I do want to kind of hear it and deal with it. But I know that in some places it's not safe.
So I think that I don't know.
Paul,
I don't know if we
Pope
felt
Pope wears a kippah too.
Right. So I don't know if we have experienced anything, but it was very clear that the air is tense, and the local community feels that. There was a moment during the service where somebody was outside the door, and the community didn't quite know that they were expecting someone else. And so the entire room hushed in a second, mid-sentence, and waited with sort of holding their breath until it was investigated who was at the door. It turns out it was somebody coming in just a little late.
That happens in our synagogues here with all the security and people worried who's showing up.
But there's no actual security other than the volunteers, and no markings, you really need to know where you're going. And unfortunately, that's very much the reality for many communities. So, you talk about the excitement of this. The excitement is also connected with the anxiety about what that means.
I remember
I was going to say, to give a little bit of context physically about the appearance and where it was, this is essentially the building that we were in was basically a street level sort of storefront, okay? So, and it wasn't marked or anything like that. So, and it's it's got a steel cage door that comes down like you would in front of a jewelry shop or something like that. So, it wasn't a distinct building that was obviously a religious institution. And I think people were being very, very careful about, but I don't know if I think you need to be careful, and I don't know that, but people weren't, cowering in fear here. Okay. I mean, I want to make that clear. I mean, there's this idea of being careful, but the sense that, I didn't get the sense, and I talked to people about this there, that, they were very worried about it, but they were careful. And I think that's advisable, frankly.
So tell me about the movie, because we only got a couple minutes left. So it's a guy named Jeffrey Levick. He's putting together a film about the journey to Valencia, correct?
Oh, he started. Well, as you know, the documentaries, you may have an idea and an outline, but then once you start showing up places and talking to real people, it's not like making a movie that you have a script and you follow it. You go with where the story is telling you. I think that when Jeff read about this in our newsletter and decided to get involved, I think he was more excited about the Torah and where does it come from and what's the story of the Torah coming from Poland, being restored in America and then traveling to Spain, which is in itself a fascinating story. But then it is very clear that having been in Valencia and having interviewed some of the congregants and the stories of all of these people and the very complex stories of what Jewish life in Spain looks like now, that I suspect that is going to be packing an entirely different emotional punch and likely
we'll
take
stay tuned
him
to watch it. So thanks for joining us today, Rabbi Farbman, Scott Sussman, Jim Graham. Any final thoughts on what this whole experience leaves you with, as a Jew, as a human being, as a person living in Connecticut? What? How do you feel having gone through this, and has it altered your perspective in any way?
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, just an immense sense of gratitude, and again, this connection to the larger Jewish community as it spans centuries, and that we have so much in common that I initially was not expecting. So gratitude and connections.
Anyone else?
I have a similar feeling of gratitude and just the warmth that we felt. I think we all felt just to be being a part of it, and meeting these people who were genuinely grateful to have us there and to have a Torah delivered. It was magical and very, very strong.
There was a feeling of a really good match between communities. After Friday night in the evening, once people mostly left, a few local volunteers started cleaning up. And before we knew it, while I was preparing the Torah scroll for the next morning, suddenly you can see Scott is folding tables, Jim is swiping the floor and doing a little dance with the broomsticks with a local volunteer. Melissa's clearing up cups and other things. It's just exactly what happens at TE. And in fact, Lindsay Sussman, who's our newest temple president, kept looking at all of this and kept saying, is that what Temple Emmanuel was like when it first started? And it's a very different reality in a very different era in a very different land. But there is some sense of, yes, this is what small communities starting out looks like. And the feeling that TE suddenly is the grown-up in the room, that was a whole new experience for us. Very powerful.
You passed it on. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and good luck with the project. Looking forward to the movie. Good luck with Temple Emmanuel. Thanks to Harry Droz for working the controls, our station manager. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.